Wonderful. Welcome. My name is Tim Hughes. I'm with Prince William County Government.
My cohort,
I've been a cohort for a few years.
quite a few partners in reforestation.
Yeah, and I'm moderating Julie's presentation this afternoon. And she's going to do on native shrub selections. By the way, I'm an environmental specialist in watershed management branch, environmental management division of public works. And as she indicated, we're cohorts. And so she's doing native shrub selections. I'm interested in this as well, because I have a pond in my backyard and I'm looking at buttonbush and things like that. I've learned a lot from Julie over the years. We've done a number of small reforestation projects and they've turned out really well. I manage the vacant county properties. And we found a number of properties over the years that we were mowing. And we gotta stop mowing and start growing. So we're true to our word. We have reforested at least 8, 9, 10 small vacant properties. And over the years, Julie is our arborist. She's been with the county. Now she has over 35 years of experience working in the field of urban forestry, first in Fairfax County, and for the last 24 years with Prince William County. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in forestry and wildlife management from Virginia Tech. And she has spearheaded changes to county regulations that have increased the use of native plants on all new development projects. Yay! And on those projects throughout the county, she has successfully identified, planned, and implemented over 25 reforestation projects, returning native forests to over 90 acres of public and HOA land in Prince William County. Restoring the land to forests is one of Julie's favorite aspects of her work. Take it away, Julie.
And if you'd like to see one of those forests, Bristow Station Battlefield, which is only about 3 miles from here, is a wonderful place to take a walk. And it's 140 acres and about, we planted 28.5, I think, acres of new forest there. And so you can see forests in very young stage, as well as some forest that's been in the ground for about 6 years now. And so it's starting to look a little bit like a forest.
Is that a state park?
No, it's a county park.
County park.
Yeah. And I am, we are going to, like with all our sessions, if you would hold your questions until the end, and then we'll alternate with folks online back and forth with questions. And I should leave us about 15 minutes at the end. Because we're the last talk today, I don't mind staying a few minutes extra if there's additional questions. So let's get started. All right, we're doing great. Let's start with the last one where it didn't seem to want to respond to.
Carly, what were you doing?
Let's try that.
You okay? Huh?
No, there we go. Okay, so if you're in my reforestation class, you've seen this slide. If you're trying to reestablish a healthy native forest, there's 5 levels to that: overstory, understory, shrub, and herbaceous.
Charlie, no.
Layer that we've heard probably a lot about today. The shrub is that lowest woody layer. So you don't have to have all of this on your property in order to benefit from these shrubs. But if you may want to also just think about bringing shrubs into an existing woodland if you're missing that layer, because often this layer, because we have such heavy deer pressure, this is often the layer that's very difficult to establish and that the deer are most likely decimating and removing from the land. So it's valuable for numerous reasons, and partly because it's that missing layer. So I also meet a lot of homeowners and HOAs that when they look at a wooded area, they think, I really want a clean wood. And I'll get phone calls from people saying, I'd like to clean up my woods. And I immediately say, and what do you mean by that? Because I don't know, for one thing. They might be saying, I just want to pull the trash out of there. But they might be thinking, oh, I want to remove all that underbrush and I want to remove the leaf litter and they want to put down lawn or something like that. So oftentimes that shrub layer is what's being removed from them, not just by deer, but by us. Shrubs are also host to numerous species of the larval stages of numerous species of pollinators. So they're very beneficial from that standpoint. They're an excellent source of hard mast and soft mast for a food as a food source. So hard mast would be shrubs that produce a nut or a seed. And soft mast would be shrubs that produce a berry. So it has some flesh and part to it. Both of those are very valuable to wildlife. Also, if you're familiar with Desiree Narango, I've got some reference to a paper that she wrote down in the lower right corner there. Excuse me, Desiree Narango wrote a paper, did research and wrote a paper on how many natives were needed percentage-wise in a suburban setting to support local songbird populations. Specifically, she looked at black chickadees. And what she found is that if that suburban context did not have at least 70% of the leafy biomass was native plants, then the local songbird population could not maintain itself. It would drop. And so trees are probably the hugest, the biggest competitor, or the biggest contributor to that leafy biomass, but shrubs are also a very important contributor to that. So if you're trying to get your yard up to 70% or more native leaf biomass, shrubs is a good way to increase that percentage. And then it's also a very important layer for nesting birds. A lot of birds, let's see, I think that might be my next slide. Yes. So these are our breeding birds. I talk a lot about birds because in addition to being interested in trees, I do a lot of birding. And I think they're a really good target for if you're trying to improve your property, to think about how you can improve it, not just for the plants, but for animals. And so I use birds as a kind of a measure of how am I doing if I'm improving my habitat. And so this is a list of birds that breed right in our area, in the Northern Virginia area, that use the shrub layer to breed in. The white asterisk, you see there's a lot of them. And some of you may not have heard of if you're not. Is species that are documented to be in decline somewhere in the United States and likely in our area as well. The green asterisk is Virginia's a species, they're in a list called the Virginia species of greatest conservation needs. So these are species that we know for a fact are in Virginia, there's serious decline and they need assistance. And so several of these are breeding in our shrub layer, and that can be that one of the pieces that's causing them to decline is they simply don't have the habitat to breed in. So shrubs can do a lot of good things. There are at least 40 species of shrub species native to Prince William County. So what that tells us is we've got a lot to choose from, and that's really good. Another 30 species are native elsewhere in Virginia. So altogether, if you just looked at Virginia, you've got over 70 species of shrubs that are native in Virginia. And so that's really a whole lot to choose from. Some of them, a lot of them, you'll be able to find in your regular old nursery that might go to down the street. Some of them will only be available in a native only nursery. And so if you can't find them locally in a regular garden center, then try a native plant nursery. I'm just going to go through. I'm not going to cover 40 species today. I hope you're glad about that because we would have to be long. But we're not going to do that. So I'm going to hit about 18, and then some of my favorites. Some of them may be a little less common. And then, but hopefully this gives you at least some ideas for your own property. So we're going to start with winterberry, which is a favorite of mine. This is, and I'm going to go through the slide is going to have the common name and then the scientific name, and then we're going to keep the same format for each of the slides. Height, spread, the light that it likes, the soil that it likes in a very general, the soils are going to be spoken of in very general terms. Fall color or flower covered color, depending upon what's appropriate for that plant, wildlife benefits, and then other. So taking to it. So winterberry holly is a deciduous holly. It gets about 6 to 10 feet, 20 feet max, and same in spread. It likes full sun to part shade. And it's very adaptable. So even though where normally you would see it in nature would be floodplains, low areas, moist areas, it will do very well in a typical suburban garden environment. The fall color is not particularly spectacular. It's kind of yellowish to orangish-ish. And then, but where it really shines is with its name, winter. So it produces these beautiful, typically red berries. That one in the middle is, you see, it's a variety called winter gold that produces an orange berry. But usually it produces these red berries, which are really beautiful, and they will last well into the winter months, sometimes into January. They are good bird food, but one reason they're lasting that long into the winter is because they're not the first choice that a lot of birds and mammals will go to. They're more of, we've eaten all the good stuff, what's left? Oh, the winter berry. And then they go for that. It's also the larval host to the Henry's elfin butterfly. And as I mentioned, it's deciduous. It's also what's called dioecious, which means two houses, which means that one plant has the male flowers and another plant has the female flowers. So if you want to be sure you get berries, you must have the female plant. And you must have a male plant somewhere in proximity so that it can be fertilized. That means that and you can probably find that out at the nursery. If you talk to the nursery folks, they'll say something like, yeah, we've got this particular cultivar that we know is female. Or they might just help you know that this particular is not a cultivar. Then they might say, okay, we know that this one, we've seen it bloom, we checked it out. It's a female. Okay, they're excellent for massing. And let's see, that's pretty much it. Witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana. This is a fairly large shrub, also 12 to 20 feet in height and spread. Prefers to have a little bit of shade. Can handle clay soils, so that's a good one if you got heavy clay soils. And it can handle moist to slightly dry environments. The fall colors are good yellow on this one. It also is pollinated by the owlet moth and gnats and parasitic wasps. There's a lot of pollinators on this one. Food for several moth larvae. And then the seed, which I'm just over here, this seed is kind of curious because when it dries out, it actually opens up and shoots its seed out. So it can travel at longer distances. So that's kind of cool. The flowers are fragrant, although honestly, I've been around witch hazel, I can't say I noticed it. Maybe I don't have a very good nose. It's definitely a possibility. Tends to be a slow grower, and the curious thing about this is when it blooms. So it's very likely to bloom. Let's see, where I was out in the woods in January, and it was blooming. So it'll bloom like December, January, even maybe a little earlier in the fall, but it definitely can get blooms in January. Maple leaf viburnum. I love this plant because it has these pastel fall colors. And so it's something that's really, in terms of fall color, it's going to be rather different than a lot of the colors you might see. A smaller shrub, it can handle, it can really take a wide range of shade from full sun to full shade. Likes moisture soil, but again, it's very adaptable. So this is something that can work in a lot of situations. The fall color is excellent, and it's the host for the spring azure butterfly. The berries are, as with all the viburnums, they produce a soft berry, and that is very good for wildlife. It tends to have, kind of like you see in that upper picture, it tends to have sort of a loose, open form. And so it's not something that oftentimes when you're in the woods anyway, and you're in a natural setting, you don't kind of say, oh, there's the maple leaf viburnum. No, it's more like, there's the maple leaf viburnum, this small, diminutive, subtle plant that's out there in the woods looking beautiful. Very high tolerance to drought, and it forms colonies. But the thing is, if it's going to form colonies, you have to have another plant, to pollinate it so that you'll actually get berries. If it won't self-pollinate from a clonal plant. Arrowwood viburnum, a close relative to the maple leaf viburnum. This one has really got a lot of diversity that it can handle. It's not a particularly big shrub. Does need more wet to moist soil, so it's not going to handle dryness very well. It can handle full sun to part shade, but it is very adaptable. And it oftentimes where you'll see this in nature is in, like, say, a floodplain or a low woods next to a floodplain. As with the maple leaf, it produces, this tends to be, because it tends to be a little bit more in sunny spots, it does produce a good number of berries, and they are used by songbirds like the cedar waxwing, as well as mammals. Let's see, again, very adaptable. The kind of plant that can make a good hedge. And there's you might go to a nursery and say, oh, I want a viburnum. They may try to sell you a linden viburnum. That's a non-native viburnum that does escape and does get into our woods and is not a choice. I would not use it. So this is a good substitute. It has a lot of similar characteristics to it. Other native viburnums include smooth blackhaw and nannyberry. And I think that fall color is pretty good. And I want to mention the tree frog. Now, you might think, why is a tree frog there? But when we're talking about wildlife and what plants do, animals need substrate to be on. Dragonflies need something they can come out of the water and climb up on and let their wings dry. And tree frogs need a place they can climb up and sort of hang out in a very social time of their lives. So I just happened to find this one on an arrowwood viburnum. So I thought, yeah, maybe you'll get a frog on your arrowwood viburnum. Oh, I meant to mention, there's a map up in each one of these right-hand corners. Most of them are taken from the USDA plants database, which is a good thing to go to if you want to find if a plant has been documented to be native in your area. In this case, they actually didn't have any documentation for this plant. So I went to another really good source, which is the Digital Atlas of Virginia. That only has Virginia, but if you're from some other state, the USDA plants is a good place to do that, to find that information. And there you can see that map from the USDA plants, and you can see how it's got Maryland and Pennsylvania and other states around it. All right, Hyananthus virginicus white fringe tree. This is a lovely, very showy shrub. Almost a tree. Some people consider it a tree. I tend to think of it more as a shrub. Has these beautiful, the name comes from these beautiful white dangling fringe-like flower petals. It's gorgeous. Again, it's supposed to be fragrant, but my nose doesn't sense that, so maybe not so much. It's very fragrant. Okay, so I guess it's my nose then. All right. It does produce berries, although I either have this is dioecious, so that means you've got male and female again on different plants. So if you're not getting berries, it may be because you have a male plant. And let's see, good larval host, good summer food, outstanding in bloom. And if you get that particular variety, it comes with its own rainbow. I'm not sure what that variety is, however, so I can't tell you which one it is. Okay, Virginia sweet spider. This has become a recent favorite of mine. It's a diminutive plant, it's a diminutive shrub, only 3 to 5 feet tall and wide and spread. Full sun to full shade, so it's very adaptable. Prefers moist soil, but again, very adaptable. Tends to mound, and so you can use it for massing. Has really, really good fall color, and mostly burgundies, mostly kind of rusty burgundies. But you may get some scarlet and crimson. As a matter of fact, you might think about using this in place of a non-native invasive like burning bush. Let's see. Really popular nectar source. The flowers are really good. Let's see. Likes in nature to be along stream edges. And so what I did was I saw this plant and I brought it into my backyard. I have a townhome. My townhome backs to a small area of trees. Middle of the trees, through the middle of the trees runs an intermittent stream. So that's common area, and I can't, with townhome, I can't have really a forest on my yard. So I do all the other plants in my yard, and then I encourage those to go out into the forest. I was hoping I was encouraging. So I planted this in my yard and thought, well, maybe that'll escape and it'll get into the woods. And it actually took several years, but I went out there just this past spring, and there were 2. And so somehow, either the wind, I doubt it was the wind, probably a bird, found it in my yard and then went into the woods behind my house and deposited the sweet spider back there. And now I have 2 growing back there. So I was like, okay, this is a good way to get plants someplace where they should be. I don't necessarily control that land, but now they're going in there. We're in good shape. Okay. And it will bloom in full shade. That matter of fact, that picture on the far right is taken in full shade. Okay, black chokeberry, Runia carpa. Again, a gorgeous fall color in this one. Another good choice if you want to get rid of burning bush or something like that. Again, good berry production as well, and good flower production. Another smallish shrub, so you don't need a big space for this. Adaptable with the soil, and the flowers are really lovely. Fall colors outstanding. Let's see. The time of year that these ripen is in the fall. And what that means is that from an ecological standpoint, you've got migrating birds that are coming on their fall migration through our area to get down to the south. This is one of those plants that's supplying food for fall migrating birds. So a good reason to have it in your property. And if you have that property with enough of these kinds of plants around, you may actually begin to see fall migrating birds in your neighborhood, making use of this. It can be colonial and sucker profusely, tolerant to floods, so you can use it in a fairly wet spot. And then it doesn't have any serious pests.
Are they still fertile?
I believe so, but I'm not, yeah, I believe so. Self-fertile was the question. Is it self-fertile? I believe it is. The fruits are edible, but the name chokeberry could probably help you understand it. I've had a lot of sugar with it, or you probably won't enjoy it.
But it sends up a lot of sucker.
It does send up a lot of sucker, so it can be a colonial kind of thing. Let's see here. Pinkster azalea. Now, this is like one of the delicate areas in my mind of the forest. It produces these lovely pink and white flowers. And when you see it in the forest, it just is like dots of cotton clouds kind of floating in the around in the sky. Not particularly, again, a relatively small shrub. Does need dappled light. Let's see here. Prefers acidic soils. Not tolerant of heavy clays. So if you do have that, not a good choice, unless you're going to change your heavy clays. Flowers are lovely. The fall color, not particularly exceptional, but it is very good for hummingbirds, bees. The deer do love it, so you probably are going to need to protect it. Let's see. Spreads by stones. This is another one, as you can see in that photo of the whole plant, that you see a small colony of it forming. And that's common for this plant. It is a deciduous azalea, so it will lose its leaves. And all parts of it are toxic, so don't eat it.
Is that true for dogs? Dogs.
I don't know. I don't know. The question is that true for being toxic to dogs? I don't know. High bush blueberry, Vaccinium corybosum. This is a wonderful native. High bush meaning it gets to be a taller plant. As you think of blueberries, this is the kind of blueberry you're going to find commercially, so it's delicious. And a lot of creatures find it to be delicious. It can be fairly tall, 6 to 12 feet. Full sun to part shade, so it's fairly adaptable. Does need acidic soils. And well-drained soils, although a place you're likely to see it will be in lower, wetter areas. So it's kind of, it needs the drainage, but it also wants the moisture. Food for many different kinds of animals, from skunks and bears and chipmunks and mice and all that kind of stuff. That sweet edible fruit is very attractive. If you're going to get good food production, you do need it to be on the more full sun part of the spectrum rather than really shady. Let's see. A relative of that is the early low bush blueberry, Vaccinium pallidum. And that's very similar, but it's all, that's going to stay low bush. It's going to be down like this. Down like, for those online, I was about a foot off the ground. And there are 16 different species of Vaccinium native to Virginia. So these are not by any means the only two choices that you would have. I'm just going to highlight, like I said, a few. I find their flowers to be beautiful. So delicate, not really ostentatious, but beautiful. All right, buttonbush. I mentioned buttonbush. This is a plant that needs water. So if you have a really wet area that's wet most of the time, this is a good plant to put in there. It can get quite tall. It tends to be sort of coarse in outline, but it's got some really interesting characteristics. And you can see the flowers there that are round and look like kind of a Sputnik satellite or something going on there.
Coronavirus.
Coronavirus, only much more beautiful and much larger. It is very attractive to a number of pollinators, a number of butterflies. This is a plant that you'll see a lot of butterfly skipper activity on it. And it's the host plant for the regal walnut moth. Excellent wildlife value overall, and it is best if you're going to naturalize a wet area because it doesn't tend to have, I mean, we tend to, you know, if we're thinking like a polished landscape, it's not a tree that's going to be polished. It's going to be kind of rangy. So be aware of that. It's large, it's gangly. And the fruits will persist into winter, and that's where you see that middle picture, only they'll actually turn a very dark brownish black. Okay, common elderberry. I'm gonna start off by mentioning this one just so I remember to do it, is that we've probably maybe been in the class today, we've heard about the value of these hollow stems from a lot of meadow plants for being a home for solitary bees that will go down in there and they'll lay their eggs and they'll provide for their young in these stems of herbaceous plants. Well, this tree has very soft pith and big stems. And it is a very good source of homes for the same bees that will be using the meadow plants. So if you want to foster generations of pollinators and don't necessarily have a lot of grasses or forbs, this is a good plant to do that. But that kind of means though that you need to let it be a little rangy and have dead stems, because it's those dead stems that the plants, the bees are going to get down into. So leave them, don't make it all neat and tidy. It's monoecious, so both the male and female are on the same plant. It has these big flower heads, you know, like as big as my hand or bigger. And then those turn into big clusters of beautiful black blue fruits, as you can see here. It's just a very fruity plant. And that provides some food for a lot of birds in particular. Let's see, it can be excellent nesting habitat and cover habitat. And elderberry is also used occasionally to make jams and pies. Although a friend gave me elderberry pie one time and they had not taken all the seeds out. And I thought I was going to break my tooth. So strain out the seeds before you make your elderberry pie. Silky dogwood, Cornisomomum, one of our few different kinds of dogwoods we have native to our area. They tend to have really prolific fruit if you grow them more in the full sun part rather than the shady part. And the fruits are interesting in the different colors that they turn. That's a picture of a Cape May warbler at the top, going through migration. They don't live here during the summer, but it will use plants like silky dogwood and red twig dogwood to hunt for insects as it's migrating through our area to different areas. So that's something we should be thinking about, I think, is how our plants not only help animals that live here year round, but they help animals that migrate through. And this is one of those plants that can do that both in the spring when they're looking for bugs and in the fall when they're looking for fruit. The fruits have a high fat content, which is really important for migrating birds. So this is one of those plants that feeds a bird well as it's doing that heroic effort of migrating south. It's found naturally in low wet areas and stream banks, and it's closely related to the red twig dogwood, the gray dogwood, and the alternate leaf dogwood, all of which are native in our area. Spicebush, Lindera benzoin. You're looking for a shrub that you can put out in your woods and it's probably not going to get eaten by a deer. This is it. My dad lives backs up to 7 acres of woodland. There's hardly a shrub back there because the deer pressure is so heavy, but there's spicebush back. There's lots of spicebush back there. So it's a very deer resistant plant. You can see from the flowering, the yellow flowering in the lower right hand corner there that it has a little bit of resemblance to forsythia. So you might encourage people to use it in place of forsythia. The berries are good for wildlife. And it can handle that full range of full sun to full shade. So that's really nice. Put it out in the open in your garden, or you can tuck it back in the woods. It's an early blooming plant, which means that it produces fruit earlier in the year. And that can be good for food sources outside of that migration period.
Sorry, which is that dioecious of the?
Oh, it's dioecious, yes. Yeah, I learned that actually only a couple of years ago when it never fruited. Oh, it's dioecious. Okay, winged sumac. All right, I'm going to gush on winged sumac. This is a wonderful, wonderful plant. I think it's overlooked a lot because it tends to have somewhat of a coarse outline. Where you're going to see this in nature is in old fields that have been let go. And the birds have deposited the seeds, and it grows up into this rather large shrub, and it's also colonial. So that large shrub will kind of duplicate itself and move along until you see things like that upper picture there with all that red in there is a colony of winged sumac. Winged sumac, in my view, I've been paying attention to it for the last couple of years when it's in bloom. I think this rivals herbaceous plants like mountain mint in terms of attracting pollinators and the hub of activity that you're going to see on a blooming winged sumac. It's just a tremendous amount there. It also has incredibly good fall color. Again, a rival to something like burning bush. It does need space. So if you've got room to put one of these in and let it do its thing where it forms a colony, you got full sun, absolutely do it. Curiosity, some people make lemonade from the fruits. I've heard people say it's really good, and people say, ugh. So let's see. Yeah, I think it depends upon how you make it, like anything.
Those red seed pods.
The seed pods on sumac are red early on. You can kind of see one in the middle there, and then they eventually turn dark and hang like you see to the left, the seed heads. So, and those will persist through the winter, and birds, because that persists, it's another fruit, a food plant that birds will use gradually through a difficult season. They won't eat them up all at once. They'll kind of gradually feed on them through time. Okay, fragrant sumac. That might look like poison ivy, but it's not. This is a very low growing native sumac, Rus aromatica, that can make a nice tangle of low shrub. And that can be really helpful for brown nesting birds and for shrub nesting birds, because it tends to be dense and tends to be a tangle, and they're kind of looking for that sort of environment to hide in and breed, or have their young, I should say. Good for pollinators, and there's over 100 species of birds that feed on the fruits of sumac, so you can see a few of them listed there. In my yard, I planted it in my front yard. It's a very fast grower, but I think it can be a little bit slower in some situations, and does form that spreading tangle. I mentioned a cultivar here, low grow, that stays really low. It's very easy to maintain, and it is dioecious.
What about deer?
I think it's fairly deer resistant.
No.
American beautyberry. Now this is one that's actually, you see the map, doesn't actually occur up in our area, but it is a really good plant. And I kind of think about as we're experiencing warmer climate, but this might be a plant that we might in time expect to see more in our area, because we're becoming a warm enough environment for it to live throughout the year. It's gorgeous in fruit, and that's what you're seeing in those, what is that, fuchsia? What do you call that? Fuchsia colored berries. They produces prolific amounts of berries, and it can be very interesting in that you can see part of the berries ripe and that bold color, while the rest of the branch is still ripening. So you get this sort of color variation as it goes along. It does tend to droop and have this kind of drooping habit, which can be very pretty. The flowers are even beautiful with white to lavender flowers. Berries are good as a food source. It's good for nectaring. And let's see here.
But when buying this, be really careful, because a lot of Japanese beauty berries are sold with the wrong.
Oh, really? Is
label.
American beautyberry?
Yeah.
All right, definitely. Yeah, check the labels, and then sometimes even the labels are wrong. So sometimes you get fooled even by
Yeah, they
the
can
garden
be-
centers.
How many native gardens have I
Oops.
seen with the wrong?
All right, now we're going to move into some evergreen shrubs. We're going to start with the biggest one, Rhododendron maximum. This is actually, I had not realized it was native in Prince William County until I took a trip on a guy's property who was on the aquapon. He had very steep slopes going down to the aquapon. And as I got to the edge of that steep slope, I thought, I really don't want to walk down in there. I saw Rose Bay rhododendron. And so it is native here, but it wants those cool coves, sunny, shady environments that are cooler. And so that's going to be important in our area because we're right at the edge of its natural range. So give it coolness, shade, part sun to full shade. It does get very large, but it's kind of coarse in outline, has a big leaf, but it has beautiful flowers that can be very showy. And because it's evergreen, it's a good escape cover for a lot of both birds and mammals. And if you've ever been in a forest, maybe the one in the mountains, where you've been on a trail where rhododendron, because it can get 15, 20 feet tall, it'll form this canopy over your trail. If you've walked through one of those, in the time that this is blooming, you will think you've died and gone to heaven. It is so gorgeous. So beautiful. Mountain laurel, another evergreen, but much more smaller plant, 7 to 15 feet. I found this a little difficult to transplant, but it is a very beautiful plant that blooms in June, early June. So it blooms at kind of a time when not maybe as many other plants are really blooming. The flowers can be anywhere from white to pink, and there are some varieties out there that have variegated, almost like concentric colors in them. Very good for a seed source for a variety of birds. The leaves are pretty thick, and if you were seeing this in nature, you'd see that it forms a very, it tends to form thickets like the rhododendron does. And that can be a nice place again for cover for plants. I have found it to be prone to leaf spot, and also mine that I bought from a nursery, I bought them all from the same nursery. They're all dying from some sort of fungal disease, which I haven't been able to identify, but it's really disappointing because I put 4 of them out and all 4 are dying. But it is very beautiful when it doesn't die. So that way, it's beautiful when it doesn't die. The flowers are interesting because the stamens are spring loaded, and I was reading a book that actually recommended you could test this out, where you can maybe take a little paper clip, the end of a paper clip, and when it's blooming, you can go and touch these stamen, and they're curled in, so that this is the petal, they're curled in, they're kind of stuck there, and the idea is that bee comes on, and when he lands, it goes, and it flings its pollen onto that pollinator. So it's, yeah, so kind of do like you were Nancy Austin was doing, where you're like scoping in on this thing and see what happens with this bug. That'd be really cool.
That tree fires a mycorrhizal relationship,
Yeah.
that's why they're all failing. I've tried many times, I have, you heard.
That could be, I don't know if that's the case, but I kind of doubt that's what I'm seeing. I think I'm seeing a fungal infection is what I think I'm seeing. And the area I'm putting it into would make sense for it to be there, although I don't have very many of them in the woods where I near where I put it. But that could be why. Okay, southern wax myrtle, Morella cerifera. This one is going to be in our area, mostly along the shoreline of the Potomac or in some low wet area. It likes to be along wet areas. This photo in the lower right is taken from Chincoteague, and you can see how it forms colonies. This is one of the shrubs that produces, when it's got enough light, it produces copious amounts of fruit. If you've heard of bayberry scented candles, this is one of our 2 native bayberries that were used historically in colonial times to produce bayberry candles. Those seeds have a very waxy component to them. And even today, you can make bayberry candles from them. Can be kind of wispy when it's in shade, but it also makes a good screen. This plant was documented, one of the earliest documentations of an ornamental, being used ornamentally from Williamsburg in 1699. It may be semi-evergreen. If we have a really, really cold snap, it may lose its leaves, but don't worry, that doesn't mean it's going to die. It just means it's going to put out a new set in the next spring. And it is very tolerant of salt spray. So it's a good place to use, maybe if you're close to a roadway or a parking lot or something like that, where you might have some salt issues. Of course, it can't handle tons of salt, but it can handle moderate amounts of salt. And then I'm going to talk just briefly about subshrubs. Subshrubs is kind of a category of perennial plants that are woody, but they stay really, really low. And so examples would be things like partridge berry, which is the round-leafed plant down here. It's glossy, it rains, so that's the berry. These are the little opposite branching leaves. It stays, it's almost like a vine because it creeps along the ground, but it doesn't climb anything. So partridge berry, and then that's the lycopodium, which is called running cedar. And there's also running pine, but this is running cedar, or tree club moss is another name for it. And then striped wintergreen, I don't have a photo up, but it gets not more than about that tall, but it's persistent year round. And it's beautiful if you find it in the fall leaf litter. So these are things that might be a little harder to find commercially. Check with a native plant grower. I'm not sure if anybody's growing lycopodium. They might not be because it's difficult to grow. But you can find partridge berry and probably wintergreen in native plant nurseries.
I'm sorry, which one is lycopodium?
Lycopodium is that fan shaped looking, looks kind of like it's fanned out. That's lycopodium. It's the it used to be called, when before they did all these genetic research and renamed everything, it was called lycopodium. And it's in the family Lycopodiaceae, so you can still validly call it lycopodium, but it doesn't any longer have the genus name
But is it
lycopodium.
both of the two middle ones, the tree club?
Yeah, lycopodium's generic term for both the tree club moss and the running cedar, as well as running pine.
Thank you.
That's another one. Okay, so if we're gonna talk about to plant, what don't you plant? Don't plant any of these, please. So I thought it would not even be worth putting autumn olive and Russian olive on the list, because I thought, who's planting them? And then I talked to a friend who works for a nursery, and she said, my boss planted like 100 of those out at some site, and I thought, okay, it's going on the list. So these are still, a lot of these are available in commercial nurseries. These are all very invasive and disruptive to our local ecology. So good list of do not plant, okay? And this will all be up online once we get our recordings up. So if you don't catch it now, you'll be able to come back and look at it later. All right, with that, I think, how did I do that? I go fast. I felt like I went fast. I did. So we're gonna have plenty of time for questions. I just threw this in here. Tim knows this site, right? That look familiar, Tim?
Oh, yeah.
So this is a vine. This is not even a shrub thing. This is a vine thing. This is in Prince William County. That's me over there on the side of the road. And nobody hit me, thanks. This county-owned property that we had, there's a neighbor off to the left who called us up and said, hey, that's Chinese wisteria on your property, and it's now coming onto my property. Please do something about it. So I wish I had an after picture. I just brought, I don't know, I threw this one in for no good reason. But just to, this is how here's the reason I threw it in. It's an example of how a non-native plant can take over and kill everything. We went, Tim went and had a contractor come and remove all of those vines. And this is a little over an acre of land. When he removed all of those vines, 3 trees were still alive. Because the Chinese wisteria had killed everything by climbing over top of it. Then back in October, we finally, he spent repeated efforts to get rid of that wisteria. Back this past October, I think it was 2 years that we were getting rid of the wisteria. This past October, we got enough of it cleared out that we were able to bring a group of volunteers in along with our contractor, and we replanted the whole thing in native trees and some shrubs as well. So just in case you weren't sure that natives or non-natives are really all that bad,
So
they're really
that's
bad.
right on the Occoquan Reservoir. If you take Davis Ford Road,
Yeah, you see this.
as you're going toward Manassas, it's right on the right. It's just across the bridge. You'll see all the hundreds of tree tubers.
Yeah, it's really easy to see.
Where is that?
So Davis Ford Road,
Okay.
so it's a nice thoroughfare. If you start at Yates Ford and you go toward the Parkway, you're going to go down a big hill, and it's immediately before you get to the bridge that crosses the Occoquan River.
Yeah.
It's on the left, and you'll see all the tubes there. And so we're still going to have to, because of Chinese wisteria, this coming year, we're still going to have to, our 3rd year going out and control this plant, because there's still roots in there that are producing the vine. So we're gonna have to kill some more. And I think that's all I had. Oh, no. Okay, good. I was not, I do want to go over, if you're going to the nursery, I think it can be confusing if you're not really used to buying plants and thinking about non-natives, is how do you know if you're getting native? Right? I mean, that's a good question, right? You go to the nursery and you see a label, and how do you know what is this label telling you? So I wanted to cover a little bit of that. When you, it's good if you're going to go get a native plant that you know both the genus and the species of that native plant. Take that with you to the nursery and then pay attention to the labels. If you have a straight native species, we're going to use Cornus Florida, which is flowering dogwood. We're going to use that. Cornus is our genus, Florida is our species. If you go to the store, to the nursery, and you want to buy one of those, and you see a label that has Cornus Florida, like their Cornus Florida Cherokee Chief with single quotes, What that's telling you, the straight native will not have any quotes on it. That's at all. Single quote, double quote, won't have any quotes on it at all. If you don't see something with any kind of quotes on it, you know you're getting the straight native. If you see single quotes, that means that there's been a cultivar grown, and the plant you're looking at is that cultivar. Now, sometimes that's not bad, sometimes it is bad. In this case, we have Cherokee Chief flowering dogwood. Cherokee Chief is in quotes. What that means is that you've got a grower who wanted to reproduce the characteristics of this particular flowering dogwood reliably. In case of Cherokee Chief, it has a very deep red flower to it. And he wants to sell that that deep red flower, but in order to do that, he has to be able to reliably grow it repeatedly. And so he cultivates it, he grows it in a cloning kind of fashion so that he can consistently get the deep red flower every time. And he doesn't have to wait until the tree gets big enough to figure out if it's actually that deep red flowers. So the Cherokee Chief means that that's what he's grown. He's grown this from cloning, he's grown this specific type of flowering dogwood that produces that big red flower or that red flower. So what if you see something that only has the genus, and I didn't have flowering dogwood as an example, but here's a label that says Coreopsis, and then underneath it says buttercream in single quotes. So what do you know from that? Well, you don't know a whole lot because I'm not telling you a whole lot. What you know from that is you've got a genus, Coreopsis, but you don't know what species that is. You know that because of the single quotes, it's some kind of a cultivated plant. So my advice is if you want to get true native species and you see something like Coreopsis buttercream, or maybe you just see Cornus Princess Chief or some name, don't get it because you don't know what the species is. You only know that there's a genus, and it very likely, if they're not telling you the species because they've hybridized. And so sometimes they tell you that they've hybridized it, and sometimes they don't. So if you don't know, don't get it. That was my
So
point there.
only go for single quotes if the species name is there.
Your species name there. If you've got single quotes and the species name, you know you get the genus and the species and the single quotes, then you're dealing with that native species, but it's been cultivated.
Yes, but single quotes with no species, only genus. Or
You know, yeah, I
and
have that.
cultivated is still okay.
Yeah. In most cases, cultivated is still okay, yes. So these are some sources for identifying plants. It's by no means that I've been in other talks where they have really good other lists that you can certainly use. But these are good resources for you to find native plants in our area. The top one there, native plants for wildlife habitat and conservation landscape, includes species throughout the Chesapeake Bay region. So if you're in Pennsylvania, parts of New York, parts of West Virginia, DC, Maryland, that covers species from that entire region. And the native plants for Northern Virginia is available for sale out in the lobby, presuming there's still a few left. And now I'm ready for questions. I want to put that one back up. Yes, ma'am.
Like you, I love sumac, but I don't have a huge amount of land. Is there any way to grow it to control it, keep cutting it back in a smaller area?
Yeah, you can keep pruning it and keep it back. I don't know if they've grown cultivars that would be more diminutive or not have that cloning habitat or that colonizing.
But just
habitat.
every time it tries to send us more suckers.
Yeah,
it
you're just
comes
gonna
back,
have to
comes
cut
back, comes
back.
back.
Yeah. We're gonna alternate between live and online. So what's our online?
Yeah, we've got some good chat questions here. Two related to deer browsing.
Okay.
One says, do deer eat high blueberry down to the ground?
That's turning it into low.
Question, do deer eat high blueberry down to the ground? They can, but high bush blueberry can get tall enough to be above the deer browse line. So in a lot of places where I see really good high bush blueberry in areas where I know there's heavy deer pressure and it is not decimated. But the key is protecting it until it gets above the deer browse. So you need to protect it until it at least gets maybe 4.5 feet tall. And then you can take the protection away and the deer won't be able to reach it.
And how about multiflora? Oh, I'm sorry, rose bay rhododendron deer browsing.
Yeah, it is a deer do like it. So same thing, it gets to be a big enough plant by far that you can protect it when it's young. with fencing. It doesn't have to be a lot of fencing. It might be like a foot and a half diameter, protection like welded wire fence or vinyl coated wire fence, just to get it above the deer browse line. And then once it's above that, it should be okay to release it from that protection and it should be fine.
Why is multi-floor rows on the do not plant list?
Any place in North America,
There you go.
it is very invasive. The only thing good I think about multiflora rose is that we now have a disease that attacks it.
Can I go to my neighbor?
So it's starting to get a little bit of control because of the rose rosette disease. But still, it's not native, it's very invasive. And there are other rose shrubs, which I did not put on my talk, that are native, which you can use in its place. Internal here, yes.
Back to deer, theme of the deer thing. You cite Lindera, do you know of any smallish shrub that would, in sun, like sun, that, you know, I mean, Father Gila or, you know,
I don't know Father Gill very well. Does anybody know, Nancy? You don't know?
native.
yeah, well, that's.
None of the Father Gills?
Here.
So I don't know of any other ones that are truly deer resistant. Supposedly winterberry holly is, but I have certainly seen that when deer are starved, they will certainly eat that and probably even not. Another, it's not really a shrub, but another plant, two plants that are fairly deer resistant, one is pawpaw, and the other would be American holly. We're gonna go back to online.
Julie, this is a floral designer. She says, very interested in sustainable floristry, which would use more native plants and arrangements and installation designs. Typically, I've seen many designers use Nandina and olive. Do you recommend substitutions for these two non-natives?
Yeah. Yeah. Easy question. Yes, autumn olive is probably the worst shrub invader that we have. And so definitely, I wouldn't tell you what, I'm not a floral designer, so I wouldn't begin to know or suggest what you would use in its place. But definitely it would be worth stopping to use it if you're in any way encouraging live growth of that plant. It is, autumn olive is the most common plant in our old field successional forest. So when somebody has, say, a pasture that they decide to let go, we used to, like 60 years ago, you used to be able to trust that that would grow into a natural native forest. Can't do that anymore. On my way to work every morning, I pass a parcel of land, probably about 2-3 acres in size, that they decided just to stop mowing it. And in that field now is 3 species of woody plants: red cedar, yay, autumn olive, and Callery pear. And I would say easily 2/3 of that field is occupied by those 2 non-native plants.
Yeah.
So there's no way that that is going to grow up into a natural, healthy forest because of those non-native invaders. Now, the other plant you mentioned was Nandina domestica, which is also called heavenly bamboo. That one I would not, it's gorgeous. The fruits in that are gorgeous. So these are even really good looking, but it does have a reputation for killing or being at least, it has an ability to kill birds. The berries contain, I'm not going to become sure, but it's some kind of cyanide compound. And there was a report from 2009, I believe it was, of an entire flock of cedar waxwings. And you know, cedar waxwings, they gorge themselves on fruits. They gorge themselves on Nandina and they died. And so we know that that was the case because somebody found that flock, took it to a local university veterinary clinic, and they did a diagnosis on it, and they found the Nandina berries all the way up in their crops to their throats because they degorged themselves. And they found symptoms that were symptoms of cyanide poisoning. So now, does that mean it's going to kill all birds? Apparently not, because my neighbors have Nandina, and I try to remember to go out and clip it, but sometimes I forget, and I find berries gone. And yet I haven't been able to detect that there's any decline. So my understanding is and I haven't researched this myself, but my understanding is that the longer the berries stay on the plant, the more the cyanide toxicity drops. And the leaves are also toxic, but the same thing, the longer they live, the cyanide toxicity drops. Still, if it were me, I would just get rid of it. I don't want to run the risk, and the cedar waxwing is a gorgeous, gorgeous bird. And it's possible that that would affect other species that we just don't know about. So my thought is, don't use it.
I have a neighbor who grows it, but cuts all the berries for her holiday and
Yeah.
then puts them in the garbage.
Yeah.
That way she has it both ways and
Yeah.
she refuses to take it out.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that with my neighbor's plant because it's just outside their fence. So I figured- I'm sorry.
I found getting all the berries are difficult.
Yeah.
But that's one way we might,
Yeah,
you know. you can-
yeah. But keep in mind, apparently the leaves have the cyanide in them too. So, and I haven't seen really much of anything. And it's gonna be one of those cases where it's the kind of plant that because it doesn't fit ecologically, it's taking up space, but not providing anything.
That's- Sometimes.
Tim, do we have anybody else online?
I think we have a comment, here, Carolina Rose is an alternative to
There
multiflora.
you go. And if you're in a wet spot, Swamp Rose is a good alternative as well.
Good.
Did you have another question?
No, that was it.
Okay.
Can you tell me anything about native bamboos like switch or river bamboos to be used as a hedging?
I know nothing about bamboos. I didn't even know there was a native bamboo. So I mean, yeah. Does anybody know of a
I think you're against
river cane?
River cane,
Okay.
but it's not a clumping one. It would not.
Wouldn't be invasive.
There was three
Okay.
different types that we read about.
Is it a spreading one? Does it spread? River cane, you know, the spread?
Yeah. You
Okay.
have an area, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't hear their answers.
So Nancy Beers, who's the president of the Virginia Natural Native Plant Society, says that river cane is a native that spreads slowly, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it spreads slowly. So there is a native bamboo. Right,
Yeah.
something new every day.
I think there's another one too.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
For the viperins, do you need male and female or you one species will be okay, either for the maple?
Viburnums are, I believe, monoecious, so you
Yeah.
don't need two plants, you just need, they're either, monoecious means that the male and female flower is on the same plant. They may be in the same flower, or they may be in two separate flowers on the same plant, but you only need that one plant to produce fruit. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
For the area that you cleared, how was that cleared? Was it a large piece of machine?
The wisteria call?
Yeah, that cleared those.
I think Tim used a combination of guys coming out and cutting the vines off of the trees. And then what else did they do?
Yeah, we had 3 steps to that process. One was cutting the vines down to floor level.
Using
Then we
what?
sprayed
How'd
the
you get the vines down to ground level?
contractor figures.
Like just hand loppers.
They used hand loppers to get them off of, to cut them and separate them from the top of the tree.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
And then the spray.
and then spraying the targeted spraying. And spraying that will not harm, because we're this close to the waterway, so
Right.
we're very careful what herbicide we were using. And bush hogging, we had bush hog for 2 years.
Yeah.
For treatment.
Yeah, it was not inexpensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, to make it, yeah, we were like, can we plant yet? And we're like, no, there's too much of this stuff out here. So then we thought, okay, how about now, can we plant now? And said, yeah, I think we're at the point where it's manageable. We're still gonna have to go back when things start growing and find out what's popping up and treat it, spot treat it.
I'm glad you told us how to recognize from a plant label which one's a cultivar.
Yeah.
But it's my understanding that some of those cultivars do not meet the needs of insects or birds. If they're
Yeah.
double flowering, the pollinators may not be able to get any pollen. And so it's actually preferable to get a straight species
It is.
when you can.
It is, and I think Mount Cuba was doing research on trying to find out what cultivars seem to be not doing any harm. And what cultivars are doing, like you said, they're now not accessible to pollinators or whatever. And I haven't read a lot of that research, and so I'm not really familiar.
Yeah,
with
so
where they
early
are.
findings are that if it makes the plant dwarf, that's usually okay.
Right.
But if it changes the color or the structure of the flowers or the leaves, the red leaves are not as edible to the herbivores, and so really try to avoid those.
Yeah.
Yeah, the plant trials at Mount Kuba are really incredible. You can tell.
Okay. I'm not sure.
Yes, sir.
Hazel, the American Filbert.
Yes.
Comments where it would be appropriate.
Yeah, I almost,
Substitute for autumn olive.
I almost put that on here because it's a good native. It's open, it likes sun, and it will produce more fruit if it can have
We didn't
sun.
hear the page.
Oh, I'm sorry, the question was, American filbert, which I'm taking to be Coryllis americana.
It is the Hazel.
Yeah, which is also called hazelnut. It's a shrub, it is a native shrub, it likes more open areas, more field, old field kind of successional growth. And it is one of those plants that produces a hard mass, which is really good for a lot of different kinds of wildlife. So definitely I would use it. Not very commonly used and not very commonly seen in nature, so yeah, make good use of it. All right, it's 4 o'clock. If you guys are ready to go, we'll call the day.